Asylum. Faddy clenched a boarding ticket in his fist and stared out of the small round window. An expanse of feathery white clouds floated in a turquoise sky. From the mixed-up files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler sat on his lap, but he hadn't read a word of it. The words kept swimming around beneath his eyes, not making much sense. With a shuddering sigh, he closed his eyes, leaned back in his seat, and tried to think of something else. Anything else. But he couldn't. The hot ember of guilt burned in his mind, and his thoughts flew back to the night of their escape. Habib's anguished face appeared, begging the truck driver to turn back, but the frightened driver didn't stop. The Taliban were in hot pursuit, and he had a lot of money riding on getting his human cargo across the border. At first, Safuna didn't understand what was going on, but her pale face whitened further as Noor told her what had happened. Safuna sat in shock, and then she screamed, "No!" The raw sound reverberated through the back of the truck. With superhuman strength, she lunged towards the back flap, but Noor held on to her. "We have to go back! My baby is there!" sobbed Safuna. As illness and exhaustion overcame her, she crumpled to the ground. "She's all alone. She's only 6. Faddy could hear the echoes of her anguished wails as she pleaded to the other passengers to stop the truck, to go back to find her little Mariam. But the others looked away. They couldn't stop, or they would all be arrested. Or worse, killed. Noor held on to her mother's sobbing body, trying to comfort her as best she could, her horrified gaze flying from her father to Faddy. Habib tried to climb out of the truck, but the other men wrestled him to the floor. He would get himself killed either from falling off the truck or by the pursuing Taliban. Faddy sat huddled in the corner, replaying over and over again the instant his fingers had left Mariam's hand as the truck accelerated to a breakneck pace, finally losing their pursuers in a side alley of Jalalabad's maze of streets. From there, the driver drove off the main road toward the border. By the time the truck reached Pakistan, Safuna's cries had ceased to an exhausted whimper. Habib still clung to the back railing, watching Afghanistan disappear behind them. His father's shame flowed over Faddy as the other passengers looked at Habib with pity. Habib's Gairat was in tatters. He had lost his sense of honour because he had not been able to protect his Narmis, his daughter. But it wasn't his fault, thought Faddy. It was mine. I have no honour. I didn't protect Mariam. Faddy opened his eyes and glanced to his right. Noor slouched next to him, complimentary earphones jammed into her ears. Faddy winced. The intense rhythm of drums and the discordant clang of cymbals could be heard from his seat, and he wondered if she wasn't going to go deaf. But Noor didn't seem to notice. She sat staring down the aisle with an intense frown on her face. In her lap sat a fashion magazine she'd picked up at London's Heathrow Airport, where they had caught their flight for the final leg of their journey. The magazine was open to a spread showing a model hiding in a tropical forest, dressed in shades of coral resembling an orchid. Noor hadn't turned the page since they boarded the plane hours ago. Across the aisle, Faddy eyed his parents, Safuna asleep slumped in her seat, while his father reviewed the forms they'd received from the American consulate in Peshawar. The papers had been waiting for them, arranged with the help of Habib's old college advisor in the United States. Stamped on them was the word asylum. The consul at the US Embassy had explained that the US government allowed refugees to come to America if they were in danger in their own country. We certainly were in danger, thought Faddy, watching his father's long fingers gently refold the pages. Faddy recalled the chilly night when the family had sat down for their evening meal and the Taliban had found Habib. "Turnip stew again," complained Mariam. "That's 3 days in a row." "Don't complain," said Safuna. "There are thousands of children on the streets who don't have even a piece of mouldy bread to eat." Mariam crossed her arms over her chest and sat with her cheeks pooched out. "Come, Jan, eat," cajoled Habib. If you finish, I believe there is a jar of plum jam left. Wouldn't that be nice on a piece of bread?" "Don't spoil her," said Safuna with a glower. "No treats for you, young lady, until your food is finished." Mariam had just picked up her spoon when there was a loud knock at the front gate. "Are we expecting guests?" asked Habib. His forehead crinkled. Safuna shook her head. Her eyes widened as she leapt up from her seat. "Children, upstairs, now!" "Shamim," Habib said, and turned towards their servant. "Open the door and see who it is." Instead of hiding in his room as he'd been ordered, Fadi crept down to stand at the top of the stairs. With his face pressed between the balusters, he watched a line of dark turbans file into the house, met by Habib, his back straight and tense. Shamim hurried to get tea for their guests while the group exchanged pleasantries and settled down on the cushioned floor of the living room. Fadi inched down the stairs as far as he dared to listen to the fragmented conversation trickling up to the second floor. "Your family is greatly honoured in Afghanistan," said a young gruff voice. "We have heard heroic tales of how your brothers fought against treacherous Soviets and helped defeat them." "One died taking out a KGB command post," came another awed voice. Yes, murmured Habib's soft voice. "My brothers were honourable men who fought and died for their country." Fadi couldn't make out the rest of his father's words, and he leaned forward, nearly losing his balance. Another inch, and he'd have tumbled down the steps. "You are a proud Pukhtun like most of our Taliban brothers," murmured a deep, commanding voice. "You did a great service by getting rid of those poppy fields." "It was my honour to rid Afghanistan of opium, brother," responded Habib. "Now we need your help again, brother Habib," said the gruff voice. "A man with a Western education like yours could provide great service to our country," continued the commanding voice. "What do you mean?" asked Habib. "You studied in the United States, did you not?" "Well, yes," replied Habib. "I received my PhD in America." "Ever since we took power, foreign governments like United States and France have said they will not recognize our authority to rule Afghanistan. Once again, we've been called to come before the United Nations to present our position. You could help us. You have lived among the Americans and know their ways. As our ambassador, you could convince them to accept our rule." Fadi sat back in shock. Join the Taliban? As an ambassador? He leaned forward over the banister, practically hanging upside down so he could hear his father's answer. "Brothers, you honour me greatly," replied Habib, "but I am not a leader or a politician. I am just a teacher at heart. I don't think—" Fadi frowned. He'd lost the rest of his father's words. "Talk louder." He was about to tip over when he felt a sharp pinch on his butt. "Get up here, you little brat," Noor whispered in his ear. "Do you want to get father in trouble?" Grumbling, Fadi retreated to his room. As soon as the Taliban left, Fadi, his mother and Noor hurried down the stairs, followed by Mariam, who sleepily rubbed her eyes. "Go to bed, Mariam," urged Noor. Mariam shook her head. "I'm part of this family too, you know," she grumbled. "I want to know what's going on." With a huff, she followed them down into the living room. Over the next half hour, Safuna's cheeks grew pale as she paced back and forth while Habib described what had happened. "Oh my goodness," she said, wringing her hands. "This is terrible. Just terrible." "I know. What a pickle," Habib sighed, tugging at his beard. "The Taliban have become an irritation to the foreign governments." "Well, taking in Osama bin Laden and his troublesome friends didn't help their cause," said Safuna. "But the men at the bazaar said Osama was a good friend to Afghanistan," piped up Mariam. She'd created a fort from cushions and was looking out from the opening. "He fought against the Soviets and saved us." "Oh, brother," muttered Fadi. "Mariam is going to get it." Habib smiled. "Yes, Mariam Jean. Osama bin Laden helped us fight the Soviets. The United States even gave him money during the war. But unfortunately he is using that friendship for his own gain, and the Taliban feel obligated to help him. But why? Asked Mariam. Our Pukhtunwali tenant of Melmastia dictates that we do not turn our guest out once we have given them our hand in friendship and a place at our table. Oh, Allah have mercy, replied Zafuna. She collapsed onto a chair and wrung her hands. What are we going to do? I can put them off for a while, said Habib. He ran a hand through his rumpled hair. I'll figure a way out of it. There is the smell of war in the air, said Zafuna ominously. The Northern Alliance is bringing together warring factions to resist the Taliban. Shamim was telling me the rumours he overheard in the market. Fadi and Nur exchanged a worried glance. The Northern Alliance, led by General Ahmed Shah Massoud, a great warrior during the Soviet War, was made up of non-Pakhtun Farsi-speaking groups. Many of the groups didn't get along and were led by corrupt warlords with unsavoury reputations. For a moment, Habib's face twisted in frustration. In the end, they will all want to grab power for themselves, he said in disgust. Unlike his brothers who had joined the army after high school, Habib had gone to university. He didn't believe in war or that violence was the way to solve problems. His dream had always been to rebuild Afghanistan and bring peace to its people. Fadi could see the disillusionment in his father's eyes. What are we going to do? Asked Noor, speaking up. She looked from her father back to her mother. We should have stayed in Madison, muttered Zafuna. Fadi had heard the argument before. While living in the United States, Zafuna had watched the news coming out of Afghanistan with growing concern. It had been the spring of 1996, and Mariam had just been a year old. The Taliban had risen from eastern Afghanistan and marched through the country, slowly gaining control. Are you sure we can't stay in the States, Habib? Zafuna had asked. Jean, my student visa runs out in a few months and we have to leave, Habib had told her. I could try to find a job here that would extend our stay, but don't you think it's our duty to go back? We are educated. We can help the country get back on its feet after so many years of war. I can help the farmers improve their crop yields so fewer people will be hungry. You can open a school like you've always wanted to. Zafuna had pursed her lips in contemplation as Habib had pushed on. Just last night, CNN was showing the Taliban's visit to the United Nations headquarters in New York. They're an amazing group of young men. Inexperienced, sure, but they are bringing law and order to Afghanistan. They're getting rid of all the corrupt and brutal warlords that took over the country after the Soviets left. Many refugees are returning, Habib had coaxed. In your new school, you could teach the kids all about the great books you love so much. Zafuna had smiled and relented. She knew her husband was an idealist, and in the end she'd agreed to his plan. Deep in her heart she also wanted to see her mother, whose health had deteriorated while they had been in Wisconsin. Within a year of their return to Kabul, Habib's dreams had been shattered. The Taliban took control of the capital, and Kabul University was closed. The black-turbaned young men banned the education of girls, and any hope of Zafuna's opening a school was erased. The once respected and honoured Taliban became what they were fighting against, the oppressive warlords and dictators that had preceded them. When the Taliban gave Habib the ultimatum to join them, Habib knew the family could no longer stay. The flight attendant interrupted Fadi's dark thoughts as she stopped her cart next to them. Noor snapped out of her daze and pulled out her earphones. We have 2 options for your meal today, said the flight attendant with a white-toothed smile. Chicken with pasta or fish over rice pilaf? Fadi looked at her blankly for a few seconds. His brain was slow in getting used to English again, even though his mother had drilled them every day during their homeschooling. Chicken. What is chicken? Oh yeah, Charg. Chicken please, he said. Chicken, responded Noor. Please, she added as an afterthought. She pushed Fadi's elbow off the armrest, Stop hogging my space. Fadi quickly moved his elbow. He didn't want to provoke her. She was in one of her moods again. The flight attendant gave them their trays and turned to his parents. 2 fish, please, said Habib, lowering his and Zafuna's tray tables. As Habib took the steaming trays of food, Zafuna opened her eyes. She was a little better after the medicines the doctors in Peshawar had given her, but she was still weak. Try to eat, Jean, whispered Habib. You need to keep up your strength. Zafuna rolled back the tin foil and eyed the fillet of fish lying on a small pile of yellow rice. As she picked up her fork, her eyes filled with tears. How can I eat when I don't know if my baby is hungry or not? She whispered. Deep creases lined Habib's clean-shaven face. She will be found, he said. You could have gone back to Jalalabad again, said Zafuna. Fadi watched his father's face sag. I didn't find anything, Jean. There was no trace of Mariam or anyone who'd seen her. I barely snuck back across the Pakistan border with my life. I had to bribe the border guard with the last of our cash. Fadi dug his fingernails into his seat. The 4 days his father had been gone had filled him with constant fear. If the Taliban had caught him, he would have ended up in jail or worse. It wasn't till he'd returned, dirty and exhausted, that the family had breathed a sigh of relief. But he hadn't found a trace of Mariam. We should have stayed in Peshawar then, said Zafuna, turning her face away from the food. We couldn't, Jean, said Habib patiently. We delayed as long as we could. If we hadn't left, our asylum papers would not have been held for us. Then we would have been a family without a country to call home. We couldn't have returned to Afghanistan, and we couldn't have stayed in Pakistan. But she is out there all by herself, insisted Zafuna. Mother, whispered Noor, leaning across the aisle toward them. Dad did what he could. Zafuna's eyes reddened and filled with tears, and she huddled in her wooden shawl. Jean, your cousin Nargis has a crew of men in Peshawar looking for any news of Mariam, said Habib, rubbing Zafuna's hands to warm them. Nargis said she'd call us first thing if she learns anything. And Professor Sahib is headed to Jalalabad with his sons to search along the Afghan border. But, began Zafuna. Mother, Noor interrupted. Mariam is an American citizen, so the US consulate is keeping an eye out for her too. And I helped Carla Nargis post Mariam's picture at the International Rescue Committee's office. If she comes across the border, they will find her. There are so many people looking for her. Even your old schoolmate we ran into at the United Nations Refugee Agency's office, added Habib. She will notify us if they or any local non-governmental agencies dealing with displaced persons spot her. Zafuna looked away from them and pursed her quivering lips. Noor settled back in her seat and sighed. Fadi rolled the foil off his steaming chicken and without much interest removed the plastic silverware from its protective plastic bag. Watching the spoon slide into his hand, he paused, bewildered. Mariam's voice called out to him, as if from a haze. Fadi! Shouted Mariam. I want the spoon! All right, grumbled Fadi, handing her the wooden spoon while he kept the steel fork with the crooked prong. The sun was just about to set and the two of them were in the backyard, crouched under the lone plum tree. In less than 12 hours, they would be in a taxi, headed towards Jalalabad. Fadi glanced back at the house as the last of the sun's rays glinted across the expanse of windows, tinting them silver. Withered rose bushes grew along the side of the house, planted years ago by his grandfather. Fadi wondered if he'd ever see any of it again. Are you ready? Mariam interrupted his morose thoughts, an eager smile playing on her lips. Yes, I'm ready, grumbled Fadi. He'd been cornered by her earlier that day, and in order to escape her chattering on and on about not leaving her treasure behind, he'd agreed to help. For a moment Mariam's smile faltered as she looked around the base of the scraggly tree. She pooched out her cheeks and inspected the trunk, parched and peeling from the drought. Her eyes widened in alarm. "I don't remember where I buried it," she squeaked. Faddy released a pent-up breath. "Mariam," he said quietly, "there's still packing to do, and we're leaving really early in the morning. Are you sure this treasure of yours is so important?" "Yes," said Mariam, her lower lip trembling. "All right, don't cry," said Faddy. "Just pick a spot and start digging." For the next hour, aided by the light of the full moon and a spluttering candle Faddy had found in the empty house, they crawled around in the dirt, excavating dozens of shallow holes. His fingernails caked in soil, Faddy was about to call it quits when the earth loosened around a small tin box in their 26th pit. "There it is!" cried Mariam. Her small fingers pulled an old honey tin out from near the roots of the tree, and she sat back with a tremendous grin. Faddy could see the gleam of her teeth in the moonlight. "Okay, what's in there that's so important?" he asked. Mariam pulled open the rusty lid and shone the candle inside. Nestled in a scrap of purple velvet was a tiny jar of Mariam's baby teeth. Next to it was Golmina's hand, which had been chopped off by the metal fence. There was a broken pearl earring that belonged to their mother, one of Noor's old belt buckles studded with gleaming coloured glass, a shiny stone that resembled a gold nugget, her father's tassel from graduation cap from the University of Wisconsin, and old water-stained pictures Faddy thought his mother had thrown out. One showed Faddy holding Mariam when she was a baby. "Wow," said Faddy, "you saved all this stuff." "Yep," said Mariam. "It's all the memories of my life." "Well, I'm glad we found it then. Will you keep it in your backpack for me?" "Absolutely," said Faddy, pulling Mariam up. Covered in dust and clumps of dirt, they hurried inside to clean up before their mother found them. The spoon felt cold and clammy in his hands. Faddy dropped it into his lap and leaned back from the tray table. There are a lot of people looking for her, he thought. She'll be found soon. But, niggled a dark voice in the back of his mind, she shouldn't have been lost in the first place. If only I'd stopped to put her stupid doll in my backpack like she'd asked me to, then she wouldn't have dropped it. It was all my fault. He pulled his bread roll apart, sending a shower of crumbs over Noor. "Watch it!" she growled. He offered his slice of cake as a peace offering, and she took it and stabbed at it with her fork. While in Pakistan, he tried to sneak out of Karla Nargis's house. He hadn't known exactly where he was going, but he'd wanted to go look for Mariam. But before he'd been able to exit the gates onto the chaotic, rain-drenched streets of Peshawar, Noor had caught him. "Where are you going?" she'd asked. To the corner store to get some candy," he'd mumbled. "You don't have any money," she'd stated the obvious. "I was, get back in the house," Noor had barked. "One missing kid is enough." The piercing look she had given him made Faddy wince. She knows it's my fault Mariam got left behind.